So anyway, again, the same thing happened. I wrote to my old professor at Oxford, and who's still alive, and asked him when I could come back. And he said, don't come back for 2 years, because I know there are two things you want to do. You want to get a first, which you probably will, or you might, or something like that. And he said, you want to get a blue for playing rugby for Oxford.
A first is a very high academic
That's the highest
mark
you get, yes. Yeah. There are double firsts occasionally, and very, very rarely triple firsts, but a first is pretty good. And indeed, that was my ambition. It was to get a first and to play rugby for Oxford and get a blue. And he said that the pile-up of veterans who came out of the armed forces before I did, because I was so much younger, was so great that Oxford now had one of the greatest rugby teams in the world, and I had no chance of getting into the team. So I should wait 2 years until they'd all gone back to New Zealand and South Africa and the United States and everywhere. Then I'd get into the team. So in the meantime, I thought, well, I'll try that acting lark again. So I just walked into this Globe Theatre and asked if I could see the big boss, who was a man called Hugh Beaumont, known far and wide as Binky Beaumont. And I said, do you remember me? We met at Oxford and all that. And he gave me a contract for £10 a week. And I did, my first play was with Paul Scofield. And I played his best friend in a play by Terence Vatican called Adventure Story. And I had quite an important part. Scofield was very much the star, but I had the second, yes, about the second part. And I was fired after 3 days. And they all, I must say, nobody's been fired more beautifully. Terence Vatican wrote me a long letter saying how sorry he was. And Peter Glenville, the director, the similar, and the producer, who was Binky Beaumont, said that the reason was that I was far too pretty.
Pretty? Pretty,
yes. I have a good look. Oh. I was too pretty to play the part. It would give it overtones of homosexuality if I played Hephaestion, the part was. So, however, I didn't believe them for a second, of course. But immediately I got a part with John Gielgud in a play called The Lady's Not for Burning, which was a huge success. And oddly enough, despite the fact that now I'm famous for my, chiefly famous for my voice, which I don't think extraordinary at all, but other people do, it was practically a silent part. And the part that people chiefly remember is my scrubbing the stage. I scrubbed the stage all the way in total silence. From me, I mean. There was a big scene that went on between John Gielgud and Pamela Brown. And that miming of the scrubbing of the stage, like the next day, I awoke, like Byron says, to find myself famous. And I still couldn't understand what the devil they were talking about. And so then Gielgud very kindly took me out of the play, because I could, you know, it ran for forever. He took me out of the play after about 6 months and put on a play himself for me, in which I played my first starring role, which was another Christopher Fry play, which is called The Boy with the Cart. And at the end of the play, beautiful little play, at the end of the play, I had to explain. I played a saint. Have another good look. At the end of the play, I had to describe how this strange man came and put up the king post of a church. I'd been told by God, he's a Saxon saint, Cuthman, Saint Cuthman. I'd been told by God to take my mother in a barrow and wheel her all over England till God told me where to stop and build a church. And so I wheeled this delicious leading lady I had called Mary Gerald, a tiny, fragile wisp of a lady. And I wheeled her all over the stage. We had this little mountain on the stage until finally we stopped. And there I built the church with the villagers, all mimed, of course. And I'm left alone on the stage, and suddenly the king post goes into place. You don't see it, the audience, there's no building. The audience has to imagine it, and I have to imagine it. And then the villagers come back on, and they stare in wonder at the fact that the church is built, it's finished. And they say to me, what happened, Cuthman, what happened? And I said, well, this man appeared. Well, a sort of man. he was carved out of sunlight. And he put the king post in place. And I could feel the absolute stillness of the audience and the long gone atavistic hairs on the back of my spine rose. I thought, what an extraordinary feeling. That was the first time I felt that sense of, actually it was Christopher Fry who did it, not me. I was merely the medium through which the words went. But nevertheless, it was an eerie feeling.
And that's when you were possessed by
That's when
acting.
I thought I'd go on with it, yes.
Yeah. It's a good thing you did. I'm glad you didn't get in a dud of a play at that point and decided to go back to the mines or whatever. Does it seem to you that there's an excessive amount of comparing one actor with another? When Olivier does something, they'll talk about Gielgud's this and that, and your Titus and Olivier's Titus Andronicus, and that kind of thing. They're leaping now into much later, of course. I often wonder if that introduces a feeling of competition always. Are you always aware of Olivier and Gielgud looking over your shoulder when you do a role?
Well, no, not so much Olivier, because I realized at once, I saw him in the film, I realized at once that we were very similar in type. We have the same sort of features. The planes of our face are vaguely alike. And I don't mean that we look alike, really, but we have the same sort of shape and weight and size and so on. Also, I realized that my voice was very near, in its natural way, to Olivier's, except mine was, his is much more a silver trumpet, mine is a sort of baritone. Yeah. And so I deliberately avoided seeing him. Though I did see him, I saw him in two plays in my whole life. One was The Entertainer of John Osborne's, and the other was a play called Semi-Detached by I don't know who. And I saw about half an hour of Beckett, which he did here on Broadway, and I was playing across the street, and on the opening night they went up much earlier than we did, so I popped over to see him. So I deliberately avoided watching Larry Olivier, who was a very great friend, in case I was over-influenced by him. But I deliberately watched Gielgud, because we were so different that there was no possible way that Gielgud could influence my speaking of verse or my movement or anything, because we were so totally different. And I learned an enormous amount from him. I believe Gielgud to be the finest verse speaker in the world. And when he does it when he's at his very best, it's that hair-raising job again, all over again.
He was here the other day, and he in fact recalled the scrubbing scene and said that even with your back to the audience, you had some sense, some power, or whatever that mysterious thing is, and recalled that scene. But it's interesting that you've consciously deprived yourself, in a way, of seeing what many people call,
yes,
if not the greatest actor.
Well, I wasn't really aware of it, but Ken Tynan, you know who Ken Tynan is. Yeah, Ken Tynan is writing a profile for the New Yorker of Laurence Olivier. And so he came to me he knew that I was a friend of Olivier's, and he came to me to interview me about Olivier, and I said, are you sure that you got Larry's permission and so on? And he said he did, and I saw Larry later, and I don't think he really did have it, but anyway, I was very cagey. But it was only when Ken, who's also a friend, asked me how much influence Olivier had on me, that before going to see Ken, I thought, I said to my wife, Susan, what am I going to say to Ken about Larry? Because I don't want to tell, scatological stories or anything like that, if indeed there are any. So
sounds like there are.
Anyway, and so I was sitting there before meeting Tynan for dinner, and I said, I've only seen Larry in 2 plays. Never seen him play Shakespeare, never seen. And that was, I was really surprised myself that I'd seen him so little. Of course, you must understand that I've been a tax exile from Great Britain for the last 23 years, which also accounts for the fact that I haven't seen him. Yes. I've lived in Switzerland for 23 years.
Gee. Well, do you avoid his films for the same reason, or do you feel not vulnerable to the influence?
Well, I don't
there?
watch films anyway, and so that was no deprivation.
Yeah. Okay. Can a bad review still get to you?
I think so. Even a good one can.
Yeah.
For instance, the recent play that opened, I haven't read any notices about myself.
That's a rule, is it?
Yes. I don't make a fetish of it, but I'd rather not know. Good or bad, I'd rather not know. Because if they're good, as I always say, they're not good enough. Yeah. And if they're bad, they upset you. Yeah. And, however, when Camelot opened here in New York, a month ago, whatever it was, Susan said that the notices are very good, particularly for you. And she said, and the Times is a sort of rave. And she kept on sort of shoving it around, hoping that I would read it. But I resolutely refused to read it, or to read anything.
I hope she hid the one from you that said that you seem to own the stage as if by birthright.
Oh, God.
Because, I don't see how you could ever go on stage again after.
No, but let me tell you what happened. Susan was calling her mother and father on the telephone, and she said, "You'd better leave the room and go into the other bedroom, because I'm going to read the notices out to them." And so I went 2 rooms away, sat there with my little book, and I'm afraid I heard about 4 lines of the Times notice. And it was marvelous. And the man says, and when he says the word
Isn't it lucky that we're going to have to finish this story tomorrow night?
You mean we've been at it all that time? Stop talking.
It's amazing. And I have laryngitis. I don't understand. We'll get right to this. Okay. Richard Burton and friend. We'll see you then.